This is the story of a weapon that became a character in its own right. A blade that possessed a will born of malice, and a voice that spoke only in the final moments of despair. The most tragic hero in the history of men did not wield an ordinary weapon. He carried a sentient sword forged from a fallen star, a blade that thirsted for blood and spoke to its master before the final kill. Its malice was so profound that it makes the corrupting influence of the One Ring seem a subtle whisper. This sword was not a passive tool of corruption. It was an active, malevolent participant in the doom of all who touched it. This is the dark history of Gertang, the Iron of Death, and its origins are as grim as the deeds it would one day perform. Our story begins not with the hero, but with the smith. In the twilight forests of Beleriand, east of the river Gelion, dwelt Elul, the dark elf. He was of the Avari, those who refused the summons of the Valar, and chose to remain in the shadows of Middle-earth, while their kin journeyed to the light of the Blessed Realm. Elul was a master smith, his skill rivaling that of the Noldor, but his heart was as dark and isolated as his forest home of Nan Elmoth. He loved the twilight and the shadows, and he held a deep, simmering resentment for the proud, bright lords of the Noldor who had returned to Middle-earth. It was a bitterness he would one day pour into metal. Into his lands, a star fell from the sky. It was no ordinary iron. The meteorite was a mass of black ore, and the lore of the elves states that the metal itself held a consciousness, a strange and inherent malevolence from the cold void whence it came. Echul, with his profound knowledge of metals, sensed its unique nature. He took this celestial iron and brought it to his secret forges, where, with skills taught to him by the dwarves of the Blue Mountains, he wrought two swords of surpassing power. They were alive. He named them Anglachel and Anguirel. To the eye, they were identical. Forged of a metal so black it seemed to drink the light, yet their edges gleamed with a pale, cold fire. They could cleave any iron forged in Middle-earth as if it were soft wood. But into the blade of Anglachel, the sword he would keep for himself, Elf-lord poured the very essence of his own dark heart. All his bitterness, his jealousy of the Noldor, his love of darkness, his cruel and possessive nature, all of it was woven into the fabric of the sword. Anguirel he would later lose, but Anglapashel remained with him, a testament to his grim artistry. But how did such a potent and personal weapon leave the hands of its master? Echiol's isolationism could not last forever. He took to wife Aredhel, a princess of the Noldor who had wandered into his woods, and she bore him a son, Maeglin. When Aredhel and Maeglin eventually fled his possessive grasp, seeking to return to their kin in the hidden city of Gondolin, Echiol pursued them in a wrathful fury. He was captured and brought before the king. His path had crossed that of the great elven king Thingol of Doryath. Long before this pursuit, in exchange for the right to dwell in Nan Elmoth, Esuol had been forced to give a gift to the king. He surrendered Anglamakel, though it grieved his dark spirit to do so. The sword, born of his malice, had now entered the armory of the greatest elven kingdom in Beleriand, and it was there that its true nature was first perceived. Thingol's queen was Melian the Maya, an angelic being of immense wisdom and foresight. As Thingol marveled at the dark blade, admiring its craftsmanship, Melian looked upon it with dread. "There is malice in this sword," she warned her husband. "The dark heart of the smith still dwells in it. It will not love the hand that wields it, and neither will it abide with you long." Thingol, proud and perhaps overconfident in his own power, heeded her words, but still placed the sword among his most prized treasures in the armory of Menegroth. There it lay, a sliver of darkness in a realm of light, waiting for a hand worthy of its terrible purpose. But who would be foolish enough to choose such a weapon, and why? The answer lies in the greatest friendship of the First Age. The sword was chosen by Beleg Cúthalion, or Beleg Strongbow, chief of the Marchwardens of Doryath, and the most skilled archer and tracker of his time. His dearest friend was the human, Túrin, son of Hurin, who lived as a fosterling in Thingol's court. Túrin's life was shadowed by a curse laid upon his entire family by Morgoth, the first and greatest of the Dark Lords. It was a curse of misery, betrayal, and self-destruction. As Túrin grew, his pride and recklessness led him into exile from Doryath. Beleg, ever loyal, sought leave from his king to go into the wild and protect his friend. King Thingol granted his request and offered him any gift from the armory, save for his own sword. Beleg, thinking of the great dangers he would face, and the need for a blade that could overcome any guard, made his fateful choice. He chose Anglamikel. Thingol was reluctant, remembering Melian's prophecy. Silmarillion herself repeated her warning to Beleg. "Beware of this sword," she said, her eyes filled with pity, "for it is fell, and your own hand may be the one it loves least." But Beleg was determined. He believed his own strength and loyalty could master any malice within the steel. He could not have been more wrong. Beleg took the sword and set out on his quest. For a time, blade and elf were a formidable force for good. Alongside Túrin, who had fallen in with a band of outlaws, Beleg used amplifies to carve a swath through the orc patrols of Morgoth. The blade that could cut any iron was a terror to their enemies. It seemed that Melion's warning might have been misplaced, that a noble heart could tame the weapon's evil. It was a fatal miscalculation. The curse on Túrin's house eventually caught up to them. Túrin was captured by orcs and dragged away towards Angband. Beleg, relentless, tracked them for days, joined by an escaped elven thrall named Gwyndor. They found the orc camp at night, under a great storm. While the orcs slept, Beleg crept into the camp and found Túrin bound and unconscious. He carried his friend away into the darkness to a thicket of thorns. He began to cut Túrin's bonds, but the ropes were tight and knotted, and in the flashing lightning he drew amplifies to sever them. As the black blade sliced through the final rope, it slipped, pricking Túrin's foot. A single drop of blood. It was all the sword needed. Túrin, jolted from a nightmare-ridden sleep, felt the sharp sting of cold steel. In the disorienting darkness and the crash of thunder, he saw only a shape looming over him with a drawn sword. Believing his orc tormentors had returned to finish him, he let out a great cry. He wrestled with the figure, and in a surge of desperate, mad strength he seized the weapon from his attacker's hand. He plunged the blade into the heart of his savior, into the heart of his best and truest friend. As the life fled from Beleg Cúthalion, a great flash of lightning lit up his face, and Túrin finally saw what he had done. His scream of grief and horror was lost in the raging storm. The sword had committed its first, truly monstrous act. It had used the hand of the man it would one day serve to slay the noble elf who had chosen it. The malice of Essel had blossomed into fratricide. The curse of Morgoth and the curse of the sword were now entwined, one and the same. In the aftermath, Gwyndor, who had watched the tragedy unfold in horror, saw the blade itself react. It wept, but its tears were black, and they mourned nothing. Túrin was broken by his grief. For days he sat senseless, holding the sword that had killed his friend, not eating, not speaking, his mind lost in a black sea of despair. It was Gwyndor who finally led him away from that dreadful place, and Túrin took up amplifies, for it was his burden to bear now. The two journeyed to the hidden elven fortress city of Narthrond. There, Túrin, still shrouded in grief, kept the sword sheathed. But the smiths of Narthrond, marveling at the strange, dark metal, offered to reforge it. The blade was reforged, its edges made new, and imbued with an even deadlier sharpness. Its malice was not cleansed by the elven fires. It was perfected, and Túrin, taking up the renewed weapon, gave it a new name. No longer amplifies, the iron of the flaming star. Now, it would be called Gertang, the iron of death. With Gertang in his hand, Túrin's sorrow was buried beneath a new, cold resolve. In Narthrond, he refused to give his true name, wishing to escape the shadow of his family's curse. He called himself Mormogil, the Black Sword, after the dreaded blade he carried. His prowess in battle was astounding. Gurthang in his hand was an instrument of terrifying slaughter, and the elves of Narthrond, who had long favored secrecy and stealth, were stirred by his valor and his calls for open war against Morgoth. He became their chief captain. The fame of the Mormogil and his black sword spread across Beleriand. But this glory was a trap. The open warfare championed by Túrin drew the eye of Morgoth. It stripped Narthrond of its secrecy, the very shield that had protected it for centuries. Gertang brought Túrin victory after victory, but each victory was a nail in the coffin of the kingdom that had given him refuge. The sword fed on blood and glory, and it nourished the pride and recklessness in Túrin's heart, the very flaws that the curse of Morgoth was designed to exploit. He built a great bridge before the gates of Narthrond, a monument to his pride and a highway for its destruction. The enemy that came was not an army of orcs. It was a foe beyond the might of any single blade, no matter how powerful. Morgoth unleashed Glaurung the dragon upon Narthrond. The elven army met him on the plains and was utterly destroyed. Túrin fought with the fury of a demon, and even the dragon's ancient hide could not fully turn the bite of Gurthang. But Glaurung was more than just scales and fire. He was a creature of immense sorcery and malevolent intelligence. As Túrin stood alone before him, ready to fight to the death, the dragon did not attack. He simply opened his great serpentine eyes, and he spoke. With the power of his dragon spell, he froze Túrin where he stood. The mighty warrior, the wielder of the Iron of Death, was paralyzed, a statue of flesh and blood. Gertang was held uselessly in his grip. He was forced to listen to the dragon's mocking voice as the orcs swarmed past him into Narthrond, slaughtering the last of its defenders and leading its people away in chains. He heard the cries for help from Finduilas, the elven princess who loved him, but he could not move. He could not act. The black sword, for all its might, was utterly powerless against the deepest magic of the enemy. It had brought him fame, which had in turn brought ruin upon all he sought to protect. When at last Glaurung released him from the spell, it was with a final, venomous lie. The dragon deceived Túrin into believing his mother and sister, far away in his homeland of Dorlomin, were suffering in bondage, and that only he could save them. It was a calculated deception, designed to send him on a fool's errand and away from the captive elves he might yet have saved. Poisoned by lies and despair, Túrin turned his back on the smoking ruins of Narthrond and the cries of the captives being led north to Angband. He abandoned Finduilas to her fate. He ran, not towards the true hope of rescue, but towards the phantom sorrows the dragon had planted in his mind. The iron of death was on his hip, a cold, heavy weight. It was a silent companion on a journey into even deeper darkness. The sword had brought glory, the glory had brought ruin, and the ruin had brought a failure so profound it shattered a hero's soul. As he traveled, a man utterly deceived, the malice of the blade seemed to hum in satisfaction, eager for the next chapter of the tragedy it was helping to write. But what is the nature of a curse? Is it a single, crushing blow, or is it a series of smaller, perfectly engineered choices, each one feeling like the right one at the time? For Túrin, it was always the latter. While Túrin raced to Dorlomin to save a family that was not there, his mother and sister having already fled to the safety of the elven kingdom of Doryath, the true tragedy unfolded without him. The orcs marching their captives from Narthrond were ambushed by the men of the forest of Brethil. In the ensuing chaos, the orcs, fearing the loss of their prize, murdered all their prisoners in cold blood. The last they slew was Finduilas, pinning her to a tree with a spear. She died, calling his name Morgoth. Túrin, arriving in his homeland to find it empty and the dragon's words a lie, learned of this too late. He tracked the orc trail back, only to find the massacre site and the fresh grave of the woman he had abandoned. The weight of this failure crushed what was left of his spirit. He wandered senseless into the forest of Brethil, a man without name or purpose, found by the very people who had tried to save her. And here, the curse of Morgoth and the will of the sword twisted again, with exquisite cruelty. For what does a sword of death do when its master wishes to die? Does it grant him that peace? Or does it find a new, more terrible way to feed? In the forest of Brethil, the man who called himself Turambar, the master of doom, found a semblance of peace. He put aside the black sword and the memories it held, and for a time he was a healer and a defender of the common folk. And it was there that fate brought to him a lost and weeping woman, found wandering near Finduilas' grave. She had no memory of her name or her past, and they called her Niniel, the Maid of Tears. They fell in love, two broken souls finding solace in one another. They were married, and Niniel conceived a child. It was a fragile hope, a small candle lit against the immense darkness of the curse. But the curse was not finished, and neither was the sword, for Glaurung the dragon, having rested in his stolen hoard, stirred again. He came for Brethil. The name of Turambar was once again on the lips of men, a call for a hero. And so Túrin took up Gertang one last time. The black blade felt cold and familiar in his hand, a promise of death. He would not face the dragon on an open field. He chose his ground, a deep ravine where the river Selon flowed, a place called Kabed and Aras, the Deer's Leap. As Glaurung sought to cross the chasm, Túrin, hidden below, struck from beneath. With all the strength of his grief and rage, he thrust Gertang up into the dragon's soft belly, burying the long blade to its hilt. Glaurung was slain, but in his death throes, the father of dragons spent the last of his malice. Niniel, fearing for her husband, had followed him. She arrived to find him lying as if dead beside the dying monster. As she wept over him, the dragon opened his eyes one last time. He spoke, and with his dying breath, he broke the spell of amnesia he himself had cast upon her long ago. He revealed everything. That the man she loved, Turambar the Master of Doom, was in fact Túrin, son of Hurin, and that she, Niniel the Maid of Tears, was his sister, Nienor, wife to her own brother, carrying his child. The truth shattered her mind. With a scream that was not human, a sound of a soul torn apart, She fled from her brother's side. She ran to the high edge of the ravine, a sheer cliff over the roaring water. She did not hesitate. She cast herself over the edge, seeking the oblivion of the black river below. Túrin awoke from his swoon to this final, ultimate despair. The dragon was dead, but the victory was ash. Learning the truth of who Ninja was, and what he had done, he walked as if in a dream back to the place of the slaughter. He found his black sword, Gertang, still embedded in the dragon's belly. He drew it forth. He spoke to the blade then, the iron of death that had accompanied him on his entire doomed journey. "Hail, Gertang! No lord or loyalty dost thou know, save the hand that wieldeth thee. From no blood wilt thou shrink. Wilt thou therefore take Túrin Turambar? Wilt thou slay me swiftly?" He set the pommel of the sword upon the ground and cast himself upon its point. The black blade that had slain the father of dragons took the life of its own master. The curse of Morgoth was fulfilled. The tale of the children of Húrin was ended. The story of Túrin is a tragedy of a hero warring not just with a dark lord, but with a fate woven from his own pride, his own choices, and a malice designed to turn his every strength into a fatal flaw. His tale is but one thread in a tapestry of war, love, and loss that spans an entire age of the world. To witness the fall of hidden kingdoms, the wrath of the gods, and the forging of the Silmarils that started it all, you must see the full chronicle. Subscribe to the _Silmarillion_Chronicles and journey with us back to the dawn.